Welcome to Resolve IBS and IBD Naturally. I'm Courtney Cowie, a nutrition therapy and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. If you are struggling with the symptoms of IBS or IBD and want to get to the root cause of your symptoms so you can take back your health through a whole person approach, this podcast is for you. Just a disclaimer that the information I'm presenting in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice. You should always consult a qualified practitioner before making any changes to your health or medical regimen. That being said, let's get on with the show. All right, Dee Davidson, I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today. I'm just going to read a little background about you, but then I want you to actually tell your story because I think there's going to be some good nuggets in there for the listener. But you are a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, my fellow nutrition cohort here, and host of Confidently Balance Your Hormones podcast. You're a single mom of 2 boys who loves nature and travel, and your journey began with your own struggle of unexplained infertility. Now you help clients uncover the root causes of chronic issues and restore balance through personalized wellness strategies, blending cutting edge science with compassionate care and specializing in hormone health. So welcome to the podcast. I'd love to hear about your journey into becoming a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and your own story with hormone health and infertility.
Sure. Thanks for asking. And I'm so excited to connect. I love our FDN community. It's just
Yes,
amazing.
it's awesome.
It's just so good. So, my journey began, as you said, with unexplained infertility. My oldest son is now going to be 15, and through the blessing of IVF, he was conceived. I also have a son who's going to be 13, who was conceived naturally on the first try. So, is it coincidence or is it because I empowered myself to clean up my body and understand some of the hidden stressors that might have been preventing that the first round? We'll never know. I like to think that it really is the fact that I was empowered and had that information and started to make some small changes that weren't overwhelming that can really have a huge impact on our overall health and vitality. With my first pregnancy, that was not an easy one. I have a little joke. I say many of us we took many avenues of prevention and not getting pregnant for many years. I was on birth control for a long, long time. My gosh, from like age 17 until, my 30s when we decided, okay, yeah, we want to have a family. And then you go to have a child and you realize, oh, it might not be as easy as you thought, right? Here you are preventing it all of this time. And so that was the real just eye-opening moment where I started to learn about hormone health and realizing all of the things that may have impacted my struggle with conception. It was really eye-opening because it was stuff that no one talks about. Number one, birth control, right? Everyone's on birth control. Back in the time that I went on it, I had lots of friends that were on it for acne and all of these painful periods and all of these reasons other than even preventing pregnancy. So that was a big one when I started to do research on that. And then I started to learn about toxins in our everyday products. And I'm like, how can this be allowed in our country? And the food, I was eating whole wheat bread and, low fat cottage cheese. And you start to learn about that. So that was my initial segue into holistic health and starting to really geek out on it, if you will, and fall in love with all of that stuff. Fast forward after my kids were born, I was about 50 pounds heavier, Courtney. And I was like, what the heck? Because I'm 5 foot, I would say 5.5 foot. I get that half inch in there. And and so an extra 50 pounds on me is a lot. And by the way, before I had my first child, I was so fit and in the best shape of my life. So it's not like I started with a little bit of weight on me. My hormones were just so messed up from infertility treatments and whatever else it had done to my gut microbiome, which I know we'll talk about. And it was so discouraging. I was doing the same workouts. I was now eating healthy, organic, all those things, and nothing was happening. So I had to hire someone that does, they're not an FDN, but they were a holistic health coach to help me reduce inflammation, balance my hormones, and do all of those things. So that was kind of the second step into um, holistic health for me. And then the third piece is post having my kids, the way that I learned about FDN, you'll love this, is that my son, who's going to be 13, he had some really bad GI things going on. And
Oh,
he was anemic. He was in like major stomach pain, doubled over, couldn't sleep, all of these things. And, we took him to the doctor, the emergency room, even Children's Hospital in Rhode Island. And they said, oh, it's probably just a bug. And the anemia, oh, kid, a lot of 3-year-olds have anemia. And I'm thinking, all right, like I give them, we're not excluding high iron foods. And I didn't know anything about gut health then, right? So I'm a very spiritual person and I believe that there's got to be a higher power. And
yeah.
I walked into this coffee shop with one of my girlfriends one day, and longtime girlfriend of mine, she ran into someone she knew who was an FDN at the coffee shop. And she said, oh, Dee, do you know Maggie? And I was like, no. And she knew that we're both into holistic health. She's like, I can't believe you guys don't know each other. You have to get together. And so we exchanged information, but it's like God planted that little thing there, that connection, because it
Yeah.
was in that time I was struggling with my son's gut health. And
Yeah.
I got together with Maggie for a consultation, and she started asking me all these questions that no doctor, or GI specialist, or anyone had asked, and even calling up things that had come up, and she'd never seen his medical records. So I was just so fascinated, and I'm so forever grateful, and I still keep in touch with Maggie. She lives in one town over,
Yeah.
for finding FDN and finding this approach because he had H. pylori.
Mm.
He had all, and he had polyps in his intestinal tract at age 3. So
Oh
that
my
led,
gosh.
we wouldn't have found that out. So you have to be an advocate for your own health. And I fell so in love with the whole FDN process. And my son, that's 10 years ago, he's not had any issues with his GI, no stomach pains, none of that stuff since we did the FDN approach. And it led me back to going to school to be an FDN because I was at a crossroads of kind of being bored with what I was doing. I was doing something in holistic health and I was like, I want to do more. I want to help people with all the knowledge that I've learned. I want to be able to get people out of the cycle of trial and error that we talk about. And I know how many people are desperate for the help. And so I went back to school right during COVID and have had my practice since. And I just picked hormone health because I feel like um, we attract our demographic when I am 51. So I have a lot of women coming to me saying, well, how do you stay fit? And how are you managing hot flashes and all of these things? So I just picked hormone health because it had to do with my infertility as well as the stage of life that I'm in right now. And our hormones are everything. People think of hormones as reproductive, but it's our brain, our metabolism, it's blood sugar regulation. We talk about type 2 diabetes. It's
Yeah.
everything when you talk
Yes.
about hormones, and it's directly linked to gut. So I want to have the opportunity to talk to you about your expertise with that and how
Yeah.
important it is. We know about the wonderful Dutch hormone test that everyone wants to have, and
Yes.
I personally refuse to order a Dutch hormone test for anyone without doing a gut test because the hormone test, I always say, is, yeah, I'll tell you that you have hormone imbalance, which most women do, as we know, but
Right.
the why we have to find out through someone like you are looking at that piece of it.
Totally, totally. No, that's so great, Dee. And I mean, so many parts of your story resonate with my journey too, although a very different one. But yeah, I mean, I was also too originally trained as a nutrition therapy practitioner, and I could actually access and order some tests with that credential, but not everything. And then I was finding, although I could help people with like diet change and I was originally trained with lingual neural testing where you'd put like a supplement nutrient on the tongue and then check different reflex points. It did work well to a point, but as you know, there's just so many more complex people
Yeah.
coming to us nowadays too. In my own healing journey as well, there were pieces that I wasn't able to figure out, and I had my diet dialed in, and I was like, okay, there's got to be, I know there's tests out there that I want to be able to run to get the answers for myself and then ultimately be able to help people in a deeper way too. And that was also similar to you, what drew me to FDN. I didn't have the direct experience with like my family or myself going through that, but when I encountered the program, I was just like, yeah, this is it. I need the testing piece. This is going to be critical. So
Uh-huh.
like it was awesome. Yeah. And I think the thing I was going to ask you just about your whole story is when you think back to like first getting interested in holistic health, do you think that was something that was kind of always there a little bit because you were active and interested in being like fit and doing exercise, or do you think it was coming as a result of like frustration you were having with the conventional system trying to figure out like the fertility issues?
Mhm. I think that I know that I've always had a love for health and wellness. I share the story of when I was in high school. I didn't play sports, but I always liked to go to the gym and things like that as I, got older. And I
Yeah.
remember my mom would, you're younger than me, but she would sit on my feet and I'd do the sit-ups in front of the TV, and then I would be eating my protein and the cliche protein shakes and things like that. So I've always loved the health and wellness stuff. Like I'm not someone who hates going to the gym. I hate when I don't go to the gym. I like
Yeah.
to be outside and active and things like that. So I've always had that, you know, passion for that. But the holistic side, I didn't grow up with that. I came from a Portuguese family, 100% Portuguese. They very
Wow.
much cook with all the bad things, all the fat, they eat a lot of bread and things like that from scratch, but it's all, it doesn't mean it's healthy, right? So
Right.
there's no organic or make sure you're drinking enough water and things. We didn't have any of that, right? Um, so that truly did stem from infertility, and especially being in that category of unexplained infertility, that was
Yeah.
so frustrating for me because there was no like reason. And I'm like, well, I want a reason. Like, tell me it's low sperm count or tell me it's, whatever. But they were just like, oh, like you're in this unexplained infertility category. And again, going back to the universe, God, spirit, whoever you believe in, lining things up.
Yeah.
I ran into this other friend who she told me her sister had gone through unexplained infertility and managed this whole support group. I forget what the name of it was, but it was something funny. It was basically based around like seeing other moms out, and we've all seen this, and they're like not being good to their kids, right? You're at a restaurant or the mall or
Oh,
whatever,
yeah, yeah.
and you're looking at them and you're like, this person is like not valuing their child, not to be judgy, right? But
Right.
whatever the name of this community was that she had, it seems like so long ago now. Um, it was kind of funny. It had like a spin on it. And so I ended up connecting with her. And that's where I actually started to educate myself. Like I remember one of the first videos she showed at one of these meetups, if you will, was about feminine products. And she said, have you ever thought about tampons or pads? And I'm like, no, but of course I use Tampax for ever.
Forever.
But how would
Right.
I know, right? And then she showed this YouTube video, Courtney, and it had a standard maxi pad and then an organic cotton one, and they
Yeah.
lit them on fire. And the whatever standard maxi pad, it was engulfed in flames because of all of the gasoline, petroleum, and the plastic and all that,
Oh,
bleach
geez.
and all that. And the organic cotton one was just slowly burning because it was
Oh,
organic cotton. But that
right.
was like, what the? I was so mad and so angry. And then she started talking about Bath and Body Works that I had been lathering in, right? The sprays, the layers of that. And so the infertility was really what opened my eyes to what we're being, I'm just going to say poisoned by. That's a harsh word, but we really are being poisoned by so many things, and we're so busy. We have so many more distractions, and women are working and taking care of kids, and now we have these social pressures that our kids have to be in a sport every season and all these things that we don't have
Yeah.
time. Why would we stop and think of it unless we have an issue? And that's where I was at, and that's what I find with a lot of my clients is they're just on autopilot doing, using the brands their mom used and doing the things, and they're not ever stopping to think like that the government wouldn't be protecting us or that companies
Oh,
would be
yeah.
allowed to do this. So um, yeah, that was kind of my entryway into holistic health. And then it's just once you open that one box and then you open another, then you have kids and then you're looking into what's going into their body and it just keeps going. And my partner, Michael, it's funny, he said to me one day because we were out to eat and I'm looking at the menu and I'm asking about seed oils and he's like, Dee, I'm so sorry that you know so much because sometimes like, once you know, you can't not know. I mean, some people do
Yeah.
put on the blinders and they're like, whatever, but for me, I can't do that. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
I've come from a point of being extreme. Like, and I don't know if you went through this, but like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to ever do this and eat out and have this and have coffee out and all these things. And then I had to come to a middle ground, right? Because it's like
Yeah.
you can drive yourself crazy and be flexible. I tell my clients, like, you might learn a lot, but you also have to maintain your mental health and
Yes.
be okay with not being perfect with everything. Do you feel that way?
One, yes, 100%. It's like so funny as you're telling the story about being in the restaurant with the seed oils. I'm thinking about, yeah, that's kind of similar to where I've landed too, because like, just bringing this into the gut realm, like a big piece of my journey that a doctor did not figure out. I actually figured this out through kind of in a roundabout way when I was going down my mold toxicity journey of, trying
Mhm.
to do some genetic testing and in a roundabout way, I found out that I carried two copies of like the HLA-DQ 2.5 celiac gene, and I'm like, well, here you go. Like this would explain why I've had all these like lifelong gut issues. Nobody ever tested genetically to see if I would even carry the potential for it, even though they did the endoscopy to, the gold standard. But sure,
Yes.
you cannot be at that criteria to meet it, but that doesn't mean that, hey, let's just check and see. So anyhow, Dee, like years ago, I really was like, oh gosh, we have to get like wheat completely out of the house now because, and I, did a wheat zoomer on myself and thought I was 100% gluten-free, wheat-free. Sure enough, I wasn't, right? And so I went kind of like you to this really extreme, like checking all of my body care products. And it's like, where is it? Where is it? Is it somewhere
Yeah.
in these other products? Went through this thing. And I mean, we still to this day do as best we can. I mean, as far to my knowledge, we've been successful at keeping wheat out of our house, but the middle ground really is like when we're out and then especially with my kiddos, like they eat pretty darn good 80 to 90% of the time because we mostly eat at home. But, the one time that it is a bit of a like, okay, I'm gonna have to give a little here is like Sundays after we go to church. We're the family that brings in this like box of gluten-free donuts. We like sneak it in, like it's in
I
my
can relate to that. I can
because
relate to that.
it's like donuts, right? After you're done with mass. And so we're going into the going into the eating area. And my 13-year-old, like your child, I'm sure, is very much teenage. He's like, nope, I'm gonna have the regular one, and I'm like,
Oh yeah.
oh, just realize like, I mean, I've told him, I've educated him, but I also feel like part of this process is like especially as parents, we have to let our kids figure things out on their own too.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, but the little ones, they get the gluten free. So we kind of have this interesting dichotomy. And that's sort of where I try to find that middle ground is like, if they go over to friends' houses or their sleepovers, I sort of let it be. And, they're going to be kind of normal in the sense of getting fed probably what most other standard American diet, kids are
Same.
eating. But yeah, you step into our house and it is probably like a very different universe, right? As I'm sure it is for you going through
Totally.
the
It's
FDN
funny.
program.
How old is your oldest?
So he is 13 and a half. So he's
Okay.
kind of just starting to hit that whole, teenage,
Uh,
like it's challenge. I'm starting to figure out the challenge of that now that he's there, and luckily he doesn't have, I've done genetic testing on all of my kids just to kind of know, and he and I both share two copies of that same gene.
oh,
And I
wow.
told him, like, of all the three kids, like you're the one who is most going to be likely to develop this. And the hard part is he might not have the gut symptoms because a good portion of celiacs don't, right? Like it
All
manifests
right.
more at like the brain level.
Right.
And so I've tried to explain it, but he's 13 and I don't know how much he really truly can understand and get down at that level of like, okay, this is super important. But he gets it to a point and he's pretty good for the most part. And at home, like we have plenty of gluten-free snacks that are, no seed oils either.
Yeah, I know.
They're
That's the other
happy.
piece, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot of gluten-free crap on the market
Yes.
too, right?
Yes. Yes. That's a very
Gluten-free
good
doesn't mean
point,
it's
Dee.
healthy.
Yes.
Doesn't mean
Yes.
it's
So
healthy.
buyer beware. If you're trying to be gluten-free, just don't pick any old gluten-free labeled product off the shelf. Like it does take a lot more label reading skills and just awareness. And that's why I think it's so useful to have somebody like Dee or me who's very
Mhm.
educated can help with that, that journey. But yeah, no, we got lots of options and the kids are pretty happy with it. But I do notice if the conventional standard stuff like a regular sandwich is on the table, if we're out of the house, like he'd go for that every time, right? Which I
Yeah.
think gets back to the hyper palatability and also the addictive nature of a lot of these foods
Mm.
too.
Oh yeah, can we talk about that? I also
Yeah.
have gluten intolerance, and I'm pretty certain my children do. They
Yeah.
are they're funny. Again, I let them be on their journey. In our house, we don't have any of that. My almost 15-year-old said to me the other day a couple things that cracked me up. Number one is there's nothing to drink here but water, which I have all my, Mountain Valley water. I'm like, that's all you need, honey, right? And the other thing was one morning he just is not a breakfast kid, and I try to get him. I'm like, "How is your brain gonna work? And how you gonna have energy if you don't fuel your body in the morning?" And
Yeah.
he said to me, "I hate this lifestyle," and I just laugh. I'm like, "You hate healthy lifestyle?" So I've also, like you, I don't want them to have because we see all the people, right? Especially women with a bad relationship with food, right? So
Yeah.
people say my mom was so strict with food and they rebel and they go the opposite way. So I try to let them find their way. And as you said, educate them in regard to their choices.
Yeah.
When they go out, they definitely, that one time my son, he posted on Snapchat, whatever the story is, I check up on that. I don't use it. And he had an energy drink. He was 12 on his bike this summer. But he
Gosh.
posted the picture. He tried telling me it was his friends. I doubt it. But we can't always be there, and we're not going to be always there to save them. My hope is that they're educated. But when their friends come over, they
Yeah.
they make remarks like they're sweet and they're all polite, but they're like, Mrs. Davidson, is this organic? Like if it's a popsicle or something. And I'm like, yeah, they all know, right? Whatever. It's all good. But with the gluten thing, can you stop and address that since you're the gut health
Yeah.
expert and how that can, I try to explain to my clients that gluten's not something that you can eat here and there if you're intolerant to it. Do you want to
Yeah.
talk about some of the reasons that is?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So this is a big one. So the thing is, probably wheat and gluten is like the number one hands down biggest food sensitivity for the majority of people out there, like whether they realize it or not, whether they're walking around with chronic illness or not. I think even like Tom O'Brien's work has looked at just like healthy populations who are consuming wheat. What will happen is the body creates this protein called zonulin, which helps to open up what are called these tight junction spaces between the cells of the small intestine. And so there's a good function to that, and the body needs to be able to do that. But what can happen is when there's a lot more zonulin protein being produced that would open up those spaces, it actually increases the capacity for leaky gut. So that essentially means that you've got food particles in kind of whole protein form leaking through directly from the gut into the bloodstream, whether it's wheat or even other foods, right? So wheat kind of can be that gateway to allow, these other secondary foods that are commonly being eaten to become other food sensitivities alongside it. So that then starts to set the stage for the immune system to basically it's always patrolling, right? And it lives kind of right on the other side of that mucosal barrier in the small intestine. So that'll actually start to be like, wait a minute, we've got all these foreign food particles and other things coming from the gut. Like this is a problem. We're gonna start to like tag these things because it's, our immune system's smart. It wants to actually like get ahead of the problems and the invaders. And then over time, what can happen is a lot of these food structures, wheat especially, look very similar to other body structures, like say thyroid gland or joint tissue or whatever it is. And if you've got the genetic, possibility to express some type of autoimmune state, right? Like this combination of things can start to turn that state on in certain people. And then that kind of creates this like systemic inflammation. Um, what was your original
What
question,
about the
Dee? I kind of
brain
got
piece?
down a track.
The
Yeah.
addiction piece, the brain piece. And I know
Oh, the
dairy,
brain piece.
we know that pieces of dairy can do that too.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. Yeah, there's like these, especially in people who are sensitive, there's subcomponents to that wheat protein that specifically can activate like these opioid, they can have these opioid like effects on parts of the brain where it'll create like a dopamine response. And it's also interesting too, because of like if you look at research done on like, I think it's Parkinson's maybe, where they looked at just the ability of certain food antigens, like this could be not just wheat, but things like lectins, for example, can travel up and down via like the vagus nerve and
Mhm.
send these inflammatory triggers back and forth. And so that's where in celiac disease, it's so fascinating where people actually can have that full on develop and in certain cases have like limited to no gut symptoms. What's happening is that inflammation is actually getting transferred mostly up to the brain level in terms of the symptom expression. And it can be quite significant. Like, I mean, severe mental health stuff can come
Mhm.
from something like,
Mhm.
celiac or like very, very severe wheat exposure. Oh, you asked about the like, why can't you eat it intermittently too? That was the other question. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the other big piece with that is when the body is sensitive to something like wheat, the antibodies that the immune system creates can stay elevated in the blood and in the body for like up to 90 to 100 days. And so the biggest probably misnomer, and I see this all the time, you probably see this all the time too, is people come in and they'll say, well, I'm gluten free, and I'll usually ask them, well, like, tell me what that means for you. Is that like you never cheat ever? Is your whole household gluten free? Do you go to like 100% gluten free kitchen restaurants, or like what does that mean? And when I start to ask those types of questions, you can tell they're like, no, and then
Even, I had someone today, we just went over her Zoomer and supplements, and she's a great student of health. She was calling all the supplement companies with the supplements she was,
yeah,
but like you said, it can be in your skin is it's a carrier, not a barrier. So your
yes,
products, there's so much gluten in shampoos and skincare products and things like
yes,
that. So people, it really is a pretty serious thing if you do come back, knowing that you have that um you know, sensitivity that you really need to be dialing in. And it takes time. And like you, I had the same experience where I completely eliminated gluten. I've used gluten-free hair products and all that even before that. And the crazy thing to me, because we do eat out, and even though I say I have a gluten allergy, was that my
yeah.
marker was even higher when I
Oh,
tested. And I'm like you, I was like, how the heck, where is this gluten coming in from? And I
yeah,
do realize that it is probably when I go out to eat, no matter, whether they say that they're treating like an allergy. I'm not back there with them. I don't know if the
yeah,
toaster is really a separate toaster and things
yeah,
like that. So it can be like it can be something that feels defeating, and you just have to, like we started this conversation, you have to be flexible for your mental health that, okay, I'm
yes,
checking the boxes and I'm doing the things that I can do. And um,
totally.
can we talk about testing too and the test?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, what would you like to talk about there,
Because,
Dee?
no, I just want to talk about the fact that, like this, we're talking about retesting, that
Yeah,
we can go down that rabbit hole too, that can be unhealthy of testing
yeah,
a million things, right? And
yeah.
retesting and testing and retesting. But
Yes.
I just love to hear, as another FDN,
Yeah.
what your take is on how much testing people spend money on, and
Oh,
you
yeah.
know how often they test, and just your view on like the whole testing piece. Because I know we both went to FDN because science and data is important and looking at the body as a whole.
Yes.
But what's your take on that, especially with
Yeah. Are you struggling with chronic diarrhea or constipation and have been told by your doctor that there's either nothing wrong or that you're going to need to take a med for the rest of your life to control symptoms? What if there was another way? A way that empowered you to take back your health through a smart nutritional strategy and through running the right testing to identify true root causes. If you are ready to say yes to self empowerment and to starting the journey to real improvement in your gut health, click the link to grab my free e-guide. Oh, that's such a great question. So, um, this is how I would answer that question. Like, I I definitely have different test level options for clients. And so at a bare minimum, I will say like keep in mind I'm serving the gut people, right? The people with IBS or even more severe things like IBD. So I'm always like, okay, I'm not confident I can help you if we don't at least run a functional stool test, because at a bare minimum, I want to see what's going on in your gut. Because prior to becoming an FDN, I was working with diet, lingual neural testing. It worked to a point, but then I would get very frustrated because I felt like the either the data the body was giving me, it wasn't a complete set of knowledge where I could really troubleshoot everything, or we would only do diet change and then we'd hit a wall, and it's like, well, now where do we go from here? And I want to succeed, I want the client to succeed. So at a bare minimum for my clients, I would say you have to do at least a stool test in my world, at least to get some data so we're competent around some of the weaknesses and stressors we're finding. But to your point, Dee, like, if someone came in and they were more in that realm of like, I've got some gut stuff, but I've also got these secondary hormonal things going on, or we strongly suspect they have like a toxic burden. Maybe they are, they've been exposed to toxic mold and they've got that perfect genetic susceptibility that, they've had enough exposure in combination with stress. We think that might be a piece of it. And or they have secondary hormone stuff going on they want me to look at too. Then it's like, okay, if we are going to run a Dutch test, for sure, always doing a GI map. I'm with you with that, because it's kind of like, if we're going to look at your hormones, it makes no sense to try to correct those if we've got deeper gut issues we're not identifying, because some of the hormone stuff could be coming from this deeper root problem in the gut, that if we don't fix that, we're just going to be band-aiding the hormones all day long, and ultimately
So,
that's not going to be, we're not getting to the root, right? Same on that same line though, like, I really try hard not to run more than like 3 to 4 tests max right out of the gate, because I do feel like the majority of clients I've worked with, there can be this very easy tendency for them to get overwhelmed, not only with going through all of those tests and taking in all that information, but also just the number of supplements we might now have to bring in. And truly, if somebody's really sick, it might be that we do have to stage out what we're going to do over the course of like maybe even 12 to 18 to 24 months, like in the
right.
most significant cases. But still at that level, I try to really keep it very like, okay, we're going to focus on just this first. And even if we ran 4 tests, we're not going to worry so much about this other data right now. We've got it and we're going to go address it, but we have to start here because this is most foundational. And so in my world, it's either going to be the gut or toxicities. Those are usually the two kind of places I go to. So in terms of just like retesting, I am not like a huge like stickler in that, like, you can't continue to work with me if you don't retest. However, I sort of like watch the client as we go through the process, and if again they're seeing a lot of symptom improvement and they're feeling like a lot better, I just find it hard to make an argument for them to continue to retest unless they're one of those very health forward preventative types of people. And we have like a small amount of those folks kind of everywhere,
Yeah.
right, Dee? Where they're
Yeah.
just like, no, but I really do want to make sure these gut pathogens are clear. Great, let's run another GI map or whatever it is, right? On the other hand, if I know that we found a lot on the initial testing, or I know this is going to be a slow process, usually I'm starting to have that conversation at the 3-4 month mark and be like, like, we've made improvement, but we're really going to have to go back in and check some of these things. Like, the things I think about checking are like, if multiple, I mean, lots of different infections came up in the gut and they're not seeing a good amount of resolution, I would want to recheck that, right? If they've got mold toxicity, or I did say like a tick-borne panel on them or something, and we saw that that might be piece of it, I would definitely want to know that that's improving, especially the mold part, because that also implies like, did we successfully get you out of an environment that might be contributing to you still getting these mycotoxins in because you're
Yeah.
inhaling them through water damage home you're living in or work you're working in, right? So those certain tests, like, definitely to me are pretty high like need or priority to retest if the person is slow progressing. But then you always have this like group of folks where they do feel better legitimately within 4 months, and they're kind of like, I'm good. So
Those are that's what I was hoping that you would say, that you're on the same
yeah,
page, because when I
yeah,
get a new client or someone's on a discovery session, I always tell them that my number one goal truly is for them to get out of autopilot and the disconnect from their body and get back in their body to
Yeah.
understand what their body needs on a daily basis. Like, do I need to be doing that HIIT workout today? Do I need
Yeah.
sunshine? How do I feel? Or I'm sure you also have people look at what they're eating and think about how did I feel an hour to hour and a half after I ate that, or how did that affect me? And
Yeah.
when I have people do that, they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't ever realize eating that food made me bop, 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 anxious or tired. And it's so crazy because, again, going back to the fast-paced world we live in, I feel like so many people are disconnected in an autopilot. And when we bring them back to connecting and getting back in touch with what their body really needs,
Mhm.
labs can be a great tool. And I feel that God like brought the lab piece in so that it's great scientific data, but we
Yeah.
have those deeper conversations on the personal responsibility of how are you, nourishing your body, blood sugar management, sleeping, all of these things. Are you getting outside? Everyone's inside all the time. What's your air quality?
Yeah.
And like you, I say the same thing is that labs are great scientific data, but the true measurement is how your health is improved, how are your
Yeah.
systems, and doing that scorecard that we were trained to do in FDN to see how it's the improvement and do we need to do another test. And I agree, if it's
Yeah.
something that's um, in there at a high level or that is a concern, you definitely want to make sure you got rid of it because we've seen this too. People go to other functional medicine practitioners or holistic doctors even, and
Yeah.
I was treated for candida and I'm having the symptoms again. So I do agree that in those instances, it's important that we make sure that it's actually gone and to go a step further and even look at like, well, candida, right? That candida is not really the root cause either, which is you're talking the mold and the heavy metals thing. So
Right.
um,
Right.
have we really gone as deep as we can given the information that we have? So I love that you're on the same page with that.
Oh, for sure, Dee. And I think like the way that we're trained, that really makes it so much more impactful. This is again just my bias and my belief is that like we spend a lot of time teaching, educating, and coaching our clients, right? Like
Yes.
helping them really learn this stuff because like we could run the best testing and the best protocols. And honestly, there's a lot of brick and mortar like doctors who have even transitioned from conventional into the functional
Right.
space. But I have not met, I think, a single one of those licensed practitioners, maybe in rare cases. I should say never, because that's a very absolute term, but like it's very rare to come across those practitioners that are as equally interested in teaching,
Yeah.
empowering, coaching, spending the
Yeah.
needed time. Like often, if you go to that type of practitioner approach, it's going to feel like kind of a little bit similar, maybe a little bit more nurturing and caring and like whole person centered, but it's like you're going to sit down, have the conversation, but then you have the testing done, blood work especially, and then you're kind of like, here's some supplements, here's your supplement
Right.
bag to
They
take home,
replace the
right?
medications, the prescriptions that you would
Yes.
give at your
With
regular doctor.
Right. With a few prescriptions that are less toxic than the typical stuff your regular doctor. It's like, okay, but that's great.
So
But
true.
people don't know how to go home then and then slowly learn to cook at home or change their diet. Like they really need a lot of like hands-on and just like help around trying to navigate. It's almost like it's a whole person change, essentially. To
Yeah,
change your health really gets you to look at all parts of your life. And I think
true.
that's where we're so skilled. Like, I mean, that's where people I think really are going to struggle is like they just don't know how to implement some of these things in terms of like, how do I get from here to where I want to go? It seems like I logically got it, but the actual behavior change
Mm.
and trying to troubleshoot things that are coming up for them, like how where would they get that if it wasn't from people like us who,
Yeah.
do
And think about the fact that, we talked about the gluten thing or the toxins. We've been studying this. This is what we do. People don't have time to have someone like you and I who comes in and is, oh, here's a whole list of my favorite gluten-free things, right? Or
right.
these are products that I go to, or this is what you should
Yes.
look out for. This is an app you can use. And also, this is a whole other level of overwhelm. Like you said, you're creating a new identity, a new lifestyle, and
Yeah.
it just can be a lot. And I think when people even go to a functional medicine doctor, a lot of times they just give up
Yeah.
because it gets expensive, right? The labs, the supplements, they're not seeing the changes because no one's really, like you said, teaching them like the foundational things, the dress, right? The diet,
Yes.
the sleep, and the all that stuff is not, they don't have the education around it. So it is pretty special what we do.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's such an ironic thing, but I think like the longer I do this, the more I realize the foundations are important. I would never go back to not doing testing though. Like that was absolutely the best decision I ever made to do the FDN
Absolutely.
program. So I still want the tests at my fingertips and in my toolbox, but I'm realizing that like when clients are struggling, it's less about that data and that information. It's more about, okay, how can I coach them better or help them troubleshoot this like change they want to make and they just aren't able to do it for whatever reason, right? Or
Right.
a knowledge gap like, hey, I just need some ideas for snacks to take on a trip. Or, what lip balm am I supposed to use now that I'm like weed sensitive, right? Like we can help answer those types of questions.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
with the functional lab testing, part of my journey as well that I didn't mention was that I did go to the IIN. So I did start my business with traditional health coaching, and I think we need health coaches out there. But
Yeah.
my frustration, like yours, was that I could move the needle with, 60 or 70% of my clients. And then there was that 30 or 40% that I would do the same thing. They're eating whole foods, organic, well, filtered water, they're doing their mindfulness, all of that, and the
Yeah.
symptoms weren't clearing. And that's when I decided, like, okay, I know I want to help people in holistic health, but I need the authority and the knowledge, and not just people can order labs. We know this now. Mark Hyman has like all these labs, and people have come to me, and I'm just like, oh gosh, it's the same thing. Here's what's wrong with you. Take a supplement. That's
Right.
the answer, right?
It's
So
not the
I not only wanted the authority to be able to order the right labs, but to understand how everything's interconnected. And that's what we do, looking at that whole body system, and then being able to help people with their healing. And yes, supplements are great if you do them the proper way, in addition
yes.
to the dress stuff. So that is the reason that I ended up going back to FDN, was because I knew I needed to know, like, well, what are those hidden stresses? What's going on in that person's body that I don't know, where's in that whole guessing game that is so frustrating for people. So we do need labs, and I'm so glad that we have them and that we understand them.
Yes, absolutely. There's such great data point tools. And I often have to have the conversation with clients too that like keep in mind the protocol we're doing, it isn't forever. It's not like you're going to be on
Right.
a lot of people don't take supplements and that's okay. I tend to like with my gut people say like, "Hey, if we get everything working well in your gut as you age, having enzymes on board or some supplemental stomach acid would probably be the best bang for your buck because it's going to help you break down the food you're
Right.
eating. So you're absorbing it even compared to a multivitamin because if you're taking stuff but you're not actually digesting it, then it's still a part of it's not going to get captured by the body and it's you could think of it as like partial waste then, right? And so they'll be like, "Oh yeah, that's very interesting." So I'm like, "You don't need to be on 20 things, but I think supporting your digestion, if you know you have a tendency to have weak upper digestion, that is going to go like miles for you in maintaining the results you've gotten. That being said, like sometimes clients are like, oh my God, I'm going to have to take 10 things forever. I'm like, no, 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 not forever. Like,
Right.
our goal is to get rid of these problems. Like, this isn't like this merry-go-round of, try these supplements for 3 months and now we're going to switch it up and try these ones
Right.
over here. Like, our way of training has an actual start and finish point to it.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's really meant to be like get those answers that the client hasn't been able to get and also impart all of the lifestyle, nutrition, stress
Yes.
management, sleep, whatever skills so that they're graduating and being able to like take that whole transformation with them and have the ability to maintain. And that's why I think it's so much higher value and such a better deal compared to being on that merry-go-round of just going back in. It's like, oh, try this now, going back in, and then, oh, try this now, right?
Yeah, we're not in a sexy production, if you will, right? Like the
Yeah.
foundational things of getting sunlight in the morning, and
Right. Right.
having your water and grounding. It's really not that sexy, but it's so important. And
Yes.
I'm sure you have the same thing. People leave and they are just blown away at all of the knowledge that they leave with. And
Yeah.
can apply. That's not like this sexy stuff of like, I have to go to a red light therapy booth. Sure, if you want to do that, it's great. But the things
Yeah.
we're talking about are more the sustainable things, the things that you just didn't know that can make a huge impact on longevity and preventative health and how you feel.
Yeah. No, 100%. It's just so true. Yeah. Well, what else would you like to talk about, Dee?
No, we talked about a lot, and I know again we wanted to talk about the gut hormone connection, and you know going back to the hormone that probably gets the most negative attention, cortisol, right? We'll just maybe
Yeah.
talk about that. Is that when we look at all the functions in the body and restoring function, cortisol, your stress hormone, people think of that in terms of financial stress or emotional stress or things. But I think it's important for us to talk about how that has that whole cascading effect and why we do the gut test with the Dutch hormone test, because there are those hidden stressors in there that could be taxing cortisol. So maybe, if you
Mhm.
want to shine some light on that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So let's kind of break it down, hopefully simple, just in case we're confusing anybody with some of the sciencey terms like cortisol, but cortisol is the body's main stress hormone. So and it has good physiological function. It's actually what helps to kind of get us up and moving in the morning. And in an ideal scenario, we actually want to see cortisol peaking shortly after we get out of bed in the morning, and then it's going to kind of like gradually drop off and then more steadily drop off as we get closer and closer to bedtime. And that makes sense because it has a stimulating effect, and that is in sync with where we would want to be energy wise as we're getting up with the sun and then going to bed when the sun's going down. And so the problem becomes, though, it's also the body's way of responding to acute and chronic stressors. And um, probably the easiest way to explain this is we have just been we've evolved to basically have this ability to either run away or play dead or freeze when we encounter a stress, right? And back when we were more primitive humans, that served us well, because if we were literally being chased by an animal that was going to harm us or eat us, we'd get this cortisol response that would kind of like pump some adrenaline and some like juice into our systems, we could run away. But it's energy taking on the body. Like, it takes energy to do
Mm,
this, and it's taking away from these other important physiological functions, big one being digestion, right, which should be operating good and strong when we're in a peaceful rested state, which we're essentially designed to be in most of the time, right? Like, we're not really meant to be constantly feeling like we're running from a bear. But the problem becomes we're now in these very complex modern worlds where we've got all kinds of like psychological, more so perceived stressors going on, not so much the actual like threat to life stressors, but from the brain's perspective, like, it doesn't know the difference, right? And so when we're perceiving these things, whether it's like our boss is going to come down on us at work, or the guy over there just cut us off in traffic, right? Like, it could be so many things. We're still
right,
having those same cortisol output responses. And when that's happening, digestive function is going to go down. So imagine like getting some sort of like stressful situation right before you're going to head into lunch. Like,
right.
totally not a good time to be like sitting down and eating. I mean, I would argue not that many people do this, but taking some time to do some deep breathing and really
Yeah,
work on calming the system down and de-stressing is really going to help facilitate getting those digestive fluids back online to, digest food better. But really kind of, I think what you're also alluding to, D, is that over time, as we've got this kind of cortisol output, what can happen is, that can't happen forever where we're constantly pushing out high and high amounts of cortisol. Like, all glands in the body have kind of their breaking point, if you will, right? And so the gland that produces cortisol is the adrenal glands. What can happen is it'll essentially get kind of worn out, and the body's going to start to run out of sort of that capacity to meet those stress demands and keep doing it from this high output state. And so we call this kind of, this is getting very into the science of it, but the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis of dysfunction. And so in the beginning, someone's going up and up and up and putting a lot of cortisol out, eventually they're going to start to come back down. And that ability to produce stress hormone is going to drop off. And then in very severe cases, it'll go all the way down and bottom out. And I mean, we can see, again, in extreme cases like people who are so exhausted, they're struggling to actually like do much in their day. They might even not be able to get out of bed parts of the day because their body is so tapped out. And wherever you fall on that curve, right, it's going to have these downstream impacts on digestion, on sex hormone production, especially because we just biologically, the body's not going to be primed to procreate if we're constantly
Yes.
in a fight or flight
It's
state, right?
the
Yeah.
last thing your body's worried about when we talk about infertility. I have a lot of recently too, I was like, okay, God, I guess this is what you want me to be working with because
Yeah.
I had a main demographic of perimenopause, menopause, and then all of a sudden I had like 4 or 5 young women that
Oh,
somehow found out about me about hormones, and infertility. And they're all, this is one of the main things is that they're type A, running on,
fumes.
adrenaline. Yep. And stressed out. And it's the thing I tell them is the last priority for your body is to bring on another life into your stress case, right?
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. Right. It's kind of like, in simple terms, it's kind of like we have this reservoir of like, however you want to visualize the energy, like maybe liquid gold or something, right? And it's like, we can't create more of it. So, like,
Right.
if a bunch of it is getting siphoned off to run the body and supercharge, like, go, 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 go straight, it would, and think about it like this is the same type of hormone that gives people in extreme stress or stressful situations the ability to like lift up vehicles because they have like
Yes.
superhuman strength, right? Like more than cortisol is going on there, but it's in that same camp of like, this is what's possible when we're sort of diverting our resources that direction. But yeah, these other background automatic functions that should be happening in a healthy, restful state, those things get completely shut down or very down regulated. And then, yeah, over time, the body's just not going to continue to be able to have a normal healthy menstrual cycle in the case of like say fertility and conception, right? Like I would imagine that there's probably some telltale signs and symptoms going on,
Mhm.
if that woman isn't on birth control pill or having some sort of like
Right.
manipulation happening, right? That's going to sort of be like, okay, we might have some problems getting pregnant now if that's a priority, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's just in my experience probably the biggest inhibiting factor to health and also the chronic stress thing and also one of the hardest to help clients figure out how to manage and balance in their lives because there can often be all of these very complex pieces playing a role and it kind of gets into the whole well it gets into the whole coaching piece big time but then you also have to kind of explore like what's within your control and what's not within your control. And are some of these things, can we change maybe how we perceive them or think about them? And so it's not so much that the stressor just is, but also how we're actually thinking about and engaging with what we consider stressful, right? Because stress is really a relative thing. It's not necessarily this like fixed thing that we would all agree on, right?
Sure. There's a lot of stories we tell ourselves too that create
Yes.
stress.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a big piece of it. And I think that can be helpful because then we're kind of talking about like disrupting these automatic thinking patterns. And I mean, a lot of this can even go all the way back to childhood for a lot of us and just what was mirrored and, what was sort of deemed normal, what was normalized, right? And
Mhm.
we're like sponges and we grow up and we sort of adopt these ways of being and functioning in the world. And we don't even think to second guess those things until we have a health challenge, right? Like that's often the entry point for a lot of people because it's painful. It's painful whether you can't conceive and you're just like, I have no idea what's going on. I've never had major health issues, but this function of my body is not working. This is crazy, right? Or you've got major digestive distress and you're vomiting after every meal or running to the bathroom after every meal. I mean, those are painful circumstances and it will start to get you to look, I think, inward and question kind of everything, right, Dee?
That's so true.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, is there anything else that you would like to touch on that you
I
think
think
would
we
be?
talked about a lot and
Yeah, I know.
we kind of we geeked out together, which is a good thing. And
Yeah.
hopefully we didn't go too over the top for the listener, but they can always
Yeah.
reach out to us for clarity if they need, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think we both have a passion for education and so central to just doing the work and getting clients to a place where they're having good results. They do have to, on some level, learn how to like understand nutrition and how to take care of themselves. And
Right.
that's a big piece of it. So, well, tell me, what is the best way for people to find you?
The best way to find me is right on my website, confidentlyloveyourself.com, or on Instagram, confidently_love_yourself.
Yeah, perfect. And you have like a seed cycling guide too that you have available, right?
So,
Yeah.
yes,
Perfect.
most women have no idea the impact that simple seeds can have on our cycle. And they can get that right on my confidentlyloveyourself.com website under Wellness Toolkit. I have a bunch of freebies right there.
Yeah, and that's such a great one because if you're looking for a nutritional starting point for balancing hormones, like go grab that guide because that's gonna be so great for
Yes,
understanding
simple.
that. Yeah. Perfect. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share, Dee, before we wrap up?
Well, we know that you're coming on my podcast, so we should
Yes.
share that also. I have
Yeah.
a podcast, and the name of that is Confidently Balance Your Hormones, and Courtney will be on there soon. So tune in and check her out.
Super excited for that. Yeah, we're gonna have another great conversation. We'll probably talk about all other kinds of stories that we we didn't talk about
Yes.
today.
Yes, some other stuff will come up.
Awesome. Well, good. It's been such a pleasure to have you on, Dee. This was awesome. I always Did you find this episode informative and helpful? I'd love to have you leave me a 5-star rating. Do you have questions about holistic approaches to optimizing gut health that you'd like to ask? Please leave your question or comment below, and I will be sure to address it personally or cover it in a future episode. Be sure to check the show notes for any resources mentioned in today's episode. See you next time.